Welcome to my educational channel on biology. I'm teacher Janet, and in this video we are going to continue discussing variation. So this is variation part 2. We are going to discuss the two types of variation, which are continuous variation and discontinuous variation. So even when we are in a group of people and we're observing them, we can see the two types of variation. Okay, for example, for continuous variation, examples are the height of the person and also the skin color. And for discontinuous variation, examples are the eye color and also the presence of dimples, and also one more is the type of earlobe that they have. So let's dive into the topic and find out more about these two types of variation. So now we go on to another topic, the two types of variation. Okay, that means variation meaning the differences in characteristics among organisms of the same species. So there are two types of variation, that is continuous variation and discontinuous variation. In continuous variation, the differences in a characteristic are not distinct, tak jelas, not clear. So there are many intermediate characteristics, and the characteristics show gradual changes. Examples are variation in the height of humans, weight of humans, hand span, length of the foot, and length of leaves from trees of the same species. Okay, so you notice that all these can be measured, right? All right, they are quantitative. So that is a characteristic of continuous variation. If you want to identify whether the variation is continuous or not, if it can be measured, it is usually continuous variation. Okay, now we'll discuss the definition later on. For discontinuous variation, the differences in a characteristic or the characteristic are distinct, jelas, or clear, very clear cut, so you can see it straight away, whether it's A or B, whether it's this variant or that variant. Now, there are no intermediate characteristics and no gradual changes. Okay, just the opposite of continuous variation. Examples are thumb hyperextension, which we'll discuss afterwards, tongue rolling. For example, some people can roll their tongue, others cannot, right? So it's very clear cut, and there are no intermediate characteristics like being able to roll halfway the tongue, right? Fingerprints, or specifically thumbprint, right? Type of earlobe, but whether free or attached, and blood type or blood group. So there are 4 blood groups, A, B, AB, and O. So here is a acronym or a memory tip for you. Okay, the 3 Ds. For discontinuous variation, okay, that's the first D. Differences, second D, in a characteristic are D, distinct. Okay, so very easy to remember whether what's the difference between discontinuous variation and continuous variation. In discontinuous variation, the differences in a characteristic are distinct. But in continuous variation, the differences in a characteristic are not distinct. Okay, so we are going to discuss more of this in the coming slides. Okay, let's say you are asked to describe the two types of variation. All right, 8 marks, or it could be 10 marks. So this is a learning outcome or learning standard. So we can mention first that there are two types of variation, continuous variation and discontinuous variation. Then go straight into continuous variation. What is it? Continuous variation is a type of variation in which differences in the characteristic are not distinct, not clear. Okay? So individuals will show gradual differences in the characteristic, moving from one extreme to the other. For example, the height of students. So maybe in the class, now you must take those of the same gender, either boys or girls. All right, so if you look at your friends in the class, the individuals will show gradual changes or differences in height, moving from one extreme, meaning the short ones, the shortest one, to the tallest one, as an example here, right? So there's a wide range or spectrum of phenotypes that we can observe, all right, among the students of the same gender in a class. And there are many intermediate phenotypes. What are intermediate phenotypes? For example, between the shortest student, maybe 1.60 meters, and the tallest student may be 1.80 meters, there are many intermediate phenotypes or observable heights, okay, characteristics of heights. So the students that have intermediate phenotypes may have the height of 1.62, 1.63, 1.64, 1.66, 1.69, 1.77, 1.78, and so forth. So many intermediate phenotypes are possible. Now, we must also make sure that the group of students are of the same age, okay? Same age and same gender. So, what are examples of continuous variation? Height, body weight, skin color, hand span, foot length, and intelligence in humans. And for plants, the height of plants of the same species and the leaf length of plants of the same species. So continuous variation is quantitative in that it can be measured and graded from one extreme to the other. For example, the height of students, right? And the hand span means the hand, the width or the distance from the thumb to the little finger when you stretch out your hands, okay? The maximum to the maximum width, okay? So the distance between the thumb and the little finger, that's the hand span. Now, intelligence in humans can also be measured through the IQ test, right? And you can take the test called the Mensa test to find out whether what is your intelligence quotient, right? So these are some examples of continuous variation. Height, weight of students in the class, but they must be of the same age and the same gender. And then skin color, all right? So there are people who are dark skin, and then lighter skin, and then those that are very light skin, all right? And then length of leaves from different trees of the same species, okay? They must be of the same species when compare them. So these are the leaves taken from trees of the same species, okay? Different trees of the same species. They have different length of leaves. Let's continue to discuss other aspects of continuous variation. So the characteristic that shows continuous variation is influenced by two factors, genetic factor and also environmental factors. Okay. Now, for example, the height and weight of a person are affected by his genes, which he inherits from his parents, and also by the quantity and type of nutrients that he eats. So the quantity and type of nutrients are environmental factors. All right. So a person may inherit the tall genes, genes for tallness from his father and mother, but that does not mean that he will grow to be as tall as them. Okay, because it also depends on the type of nutrients that he takes. So this is the environmental factor. If he doesn't eat enough proteins, his height may be stunted, right? So he won't grow to be that tall, right? Now, another example is skin color. So why is skin color considered a type of continuous variation, considered to be continuous variation? Because skin color is affected by environmental factors. And what is that? Yes, it's affected by the exposure, the time of exposure to sunlight, right? So if a person is exposed for more hours in the sun each day, then his skin will turn darker, right? So because skin color is affected by environmental factors, it is categorized probably as a continuous variation, right? Whereas eye color, how about eye color? Eye color is considered a type of discontinuous variation, okay, according to our textbook too. So why? Because eye color is not affected by environmental factors, okay? Once a person is born, the eye color that he has will be so for his whole lifetime, okay? It will not change. And it's usually not affected by any environmental factors outside, okay? Not by sunlight or whatever. So eye color is a type of discontinuous variation. Okay, it is one example of discontinuous variation. Okay, so that will help you to remember how to differentiate which is continuous variation and which is not. Is it affected by environmental factors? That's one of the clues. If it's affected by environmental factors, it is it shows continuous variation, okay, most of the time. Now, number 7, the characteristic is controlled by a large number of genes, many allele pairs. For example, the characteristic that shows continuous variation could be controlled by 3 genes on 3 different types of chromosome. Maybe this is chromosome number 1, chromosome number 2, and chromosome number 3. So each gene is made up of a pair of alleles, right? On the same locus on a pair of homologous chromosomes. Okay, so this is one pair of alleles, this is another pair, and this is another pair on different types of chromosomes, right? So that's the meaning of a large number of genes. A large number of genes are found on different types of chromosomes that are different in length too. Right, now we talk about the graph. If the data is plotted on a graph, then we will get a normal distribution curve or a bell-shaped curve as seen here. And when the data is plotted, we must draw a histogram, not a bar chart. In a histogram, all the bars should be joined, should be stuck together, right? Not separated. And then take the middle point of each bar and join them together, and you get the shape of a bell. So it's called a bell-shaped curve, right? So remember, for continuous variation, always draw histogram, and you plot the number of individuals against the range of heights or range of widths or something like that. Okay, so here's a set of data from my students. Okay, from my students, the range of heights and the number of students with that height. Okay, so when plotted the graph, you get a bell-shaped curve, all right, by joining all the middle points of the bars. Now, most of the members of the population have intermediate phenotypes. You can see the highest bar here is for 160 to 164 cm, right? Is the intermediate, or is in the middle. It's the height that's in the middle. So, namely, traits found in between the two extremes, lowest and highest value. So the extremes are like those that are 150 to 154 cm, this is the shortest, and 170 to 174, these are the tallest students. So you can see that they are smaller in number, there are less of them, okay? But the intermediate phenotype, it shows that the intermediate phenotype has more individuals in this category, okay? Now, so the graph for human height is in the form of a histogram. If the midpoint of each bar is joined together, it produces a bell-shaped curve called the normal distribution curve, okay? Where there are more individuals in the mean, in the middle, and fewer individuals at the extremes, the shortest and tallest individuals. There are fewer of these individuals at the extremes. Now let's discuss discontinuous variation. So discontinuous variation is a type of variation in which differences in a characteristic are distinct. So for memory tip, remember the 3 Ds. Discontinuous variation, differences, the second D, are distinct, D, the third D, okay? Distinct means jelas or very clear. For example, a person can either be able to roll his tongue or he cannot. Okay, so some people can roll their tongue, you can see clearly, and some people cannot. So the differences are quite clear cut, right, or distinct. Now, examples of discontinuous variation are ability to roll the tongue, eye color. For example, some people have blue eyes, some have green eyes, brown eyes, some have black eyes. Black eyes means, of course, it's just the iris that's black. Okay, that we don't not talking about somebody who is punched by another person in the eye. Okay, right? Now, blood group. So there are 4 types of blood group or blood type. 4 types of blood group: A, B, AB, and O. And fingerprint patterns, there are also 4 basic types, which we will discuss in the next slide. Now, the characteristic is qualitative, meaning it cannot be measured or graded. Qualitative is the opposite of quantitative, right? So that means just look at the quality or the feature alone, but we cannot measure it. For example, you cannot measure whether a person can roll his tongue halfway or all the way completely, or cannot roll his tongue. There's no measurement involved here. Because the characteristic can only be determined by genetic factor or by genes, all right? So for all these examples of discontinuous variation, the characteristic is only determined by the genetic factor, all right? So characteristic is influenced by genetic factors and not by environmental factors. For example, if you have the ability to roll the tongue, this was determined at birth because you inherited the allele, okay, or the specific gene that enable you to roll your tongue, right? So this is already determined at birth, and whatever we eat or do, it cannot affect the ability to roll the tongue. Okay, if a person cannot roll his tongue, that's that. He cannot do anything involving environmental factors to help him to roll his tongue. Okay, same with blood group. Generally, or basically, the blood group that we are born with will remain so throughout life. Okay, it's fixed, and usually environmental factors cannot change or affect the blood group of a person. So as this continuous variation is caused by genetic factors, it can be inherited through the genes. Okay, so for example, your blood group is determined by the genes you receive from both your parents. Your father will give you one gene for blood group, and your mother will give you one specific gene for blood group. So these two genes for blood group, we call them alleles. The specific genes for the blood group are called alleles. So in this continuous variation, the characteristic is determined by the genes that we inherit from our parents. And environmental factors cannot affect the characteristic or change it, cannot change the trait that we have. So another example of this continuous variation is the types of thumbprints. All right. Now, the first type of thumbprint or fingerprint is called the arch or curve, where the ridges are the raised part of the skin, okay, on the thumb. So they form a pattern. The raised ridges on the skin form a pattern. And in the arch, the ridges come in from one side and they go out from the other side. Okay, coming from the left, for example, and then move out from the right. Okay, but for the loop, let's look at the loop pattern. The ridges, okay, they enter from one side, and we can see that the direction of the end is coming out from the same side, right? All right, same side, the left side. So that is loop, okay, compared to arch, which is different. Now, next is the whorl. The whorl is quite easy to identify as it's made up of concentric rings, many rings, okay, with a center here. And this is also quite common, all right. The rare one is the arch, so far as I know from my studies, all right. We have done some projects on this where we took the thumbprints of many students, okay, and then compared which was the popular thumbprint. Now, next is the composite thumbprint made up of two or more patterns. Okay, here we can see two loops. This is one loop, and then this is the other loop. Okay, composite means mixed. Here are some more examples of this continuous variation. The first is called thumb hyperextension. So most people have the normal thumb, which extends upwards in an upright position when they make the good symbol. But for other people, they have the hitchhiker's thumb, where the thumb is bent backwards, almost at 90 degrees, all right, for some people. So hitchhiker's thumb, is named as such because when hitchhikers want to thumb a lift from strangers, they will put up the good sign, right? Now, next is the presence of dimples. So most people have no dimples on the cheeks, but some people do have small depressions on the cheeks, either one or two, right? And these are called the dimples. So this is genetically determined, all right, or inherited, and it is a type of discontinuous variation. Next is the type of earlobe. So most people have the earlobe with a piece of flesh extending downwards like that. But for some people, they have the attached earlobe. Okay, there's no piece of flesh extending downwards here. All right. So The last one is the color of the seed in pea plant. So some pea plants produce seeds that are green, but for others they produce the yellow seeds in their pea pods. Okay? So as you can see here, for discontinuous variation, usually the categories that are possible for a characteristic, that exist for a characteristic, are usually very few. Okay, like for thumb hyperextension, there are only 2 categories. Dimples also, there are only 2 categories. Either have dimples or no dimples. Okay, sometimes a few more categories may be involved, maybe 3 or 4, but usually there are very few different variations for that characteristic. Okay, whereas for continuous variation, normally there are many different phenotypes with many intermediate phenotypes involved. Okay, so that's one way to identify whether it's continuous variation or discontinuous variation for a specific characteristic. Next, the characteristic that shows discontinuous variation is determined by a single gene, just one gene, which consists of 2 or 3 alleles. For example, the ability to roll the tongue is controlled by 2 alleles that we can denote with the letter big R and small r. So this pair of alleles are found on the same loci on a pair of homologous chromosomes. Alright, so these 2 alleles make up the gene for ability to roll the tongue, whether a person can roll or cannot roll his tongue. Okay, so big R stands for ability or being able to roll the tongue, the allele that helps the person or determines that a person can roll his tongue. And small r is the allele that determines that the person cannot roll his tongue. Okay. Now for blood group, 3 alleles are involved. That is IA, IB, IO, as we have studied in genetics. But a person can have only 2 of these alleles on a pair of homologous chromosomes. Okay. So the characteristic is determined by only one gene, which usually consists of 2 alleles only. Okay. Now, if the data is plotted on a graph, a discrete distribution graph or bar chart with separate bars are obtained, right? So there are no intermediate characteristics, unlike height or weight. So here is a table showing you the blood group of a number of students, of some students in my class, right? And these students are of the same gender and the same age. Okay, so but anyway, okay, let's look at this discontinuous variation graph, right? So here, when we plot the graph for number of students against the blood group, which is the trait, we have to draw separate bars, like in a bar chart. So don't stick the bars together, right? Especially for any structured question or paper 3 question, draw separate bars, okay? And then you can see here that each bar is separate, so we call this a discrete distribution graph. Okay, separate. Discrete means it's separate, and there's no connection between the values of one or the other. So separate bars and bars that are not stuck together, right? Okay, so remember this word discrete distribution graph and separated bars in a bar chart for characteristics that show discontinuous variation. Even for ability to roll the tongue, there are only 2 groups of people able to roll the tongue, and then the other one is not able to roll the tongue. So we draw 2 bars which are separated. Right, that's all for this lesson. Thanks for viewing, and please do share, like, and subscribe to my channel. In the next video, we'll compare continuous variation and discontinuous variation. Goodbye for now.